Well, hello, everyone. This is Wilson Cole with Adams, Evans, and Ross and Backdoor Hires, and also Recruiting and Staffing Solutions magazine. We are doing our greatest of all time interview series, and I have the pleasure, and I know a lot of you guys know Tom Erb. He has, of course, been in this industry for 25 years. He's worked with two of the largest staffing and recruiting companies in the world, and he's also spoken at many, many conferences. I know I see Tom occasionally out on the trade show circuit when we're out with our trade show booth, but I know it's always a good draw, and everybody talks about just how much that they learn and how much Tom gives back. Tom is also president-elect of NAPS, and he's a past chairman of ASA Professional Managerial Council, and then he's been interviewed by ASA Staffing Success, HR Examiner, and many others, as well as today, Recruiting and Staffing Solutions. So, Tom, I'm going to shut up, and we'll get into the questions here, but I appreciate you joining me today.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Now, Tom, how did you get into recruiting and staffing? I find that that's either one extreme or the other. Sometimes it's by design, sometimes it's by falling into it. How did you get into it?
Yeah, I did it like everybody else does. I went to school for recruiting. I planned it all out. You know, that's how we all get into recruiting, right? No, I went to school. I got my undergrad in business administration, and I stuck around for my MBA because the job market wasn't very good. I thought I was going to get into HR, and didn't find a job anywhere. And so I was applying to a bunch of jobs. I helped a friend of mine. Actually, he got a job with Honda in Columbus, Ohio. And so I helped him move, and I applied to some jobs in the Columbus Dispatch, and Olsten Staffing was one of them. And it was for a recruiter. Actually, it was for an interviewer position. It was very entry level, primarily just intake, and took the job. And that's how I got started with Olsten Staffing 25 years ago.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, you know, at some point you of course, we're into the recruiting side. How did you get into into training? How did you make that transition?
You know, I've always gravitated towards training. I would say even back in college when I had jobs there, I was always wanting to do training. I know at Olsten, you know, we were one of the early people that implemented TempWorks, and long time ago. And so I was involved in training all the staff on how to use TempWorks. I learned that and worked with them. Going further on, when I went to Spherion, when I was running the sales team, putting together the Northeast Regional sales team, I just saw that they needed to have additional training. They needed to have training on the specifics of how to effectively sell. And so I started putting together things that others had done, like Jeffrey Gitomer and other types of experts. But then I also created my own content. And, you know, that content has evolved over the last 15 years, but that's really probably where I got started. And it's just something I enjoy doing. My wife would say that I enjoy telling people what to do, but I think I do enjoy trying to get people to improve themselves. If I can help them improve themselves and help them maybe reduce learning curves and teach them some of the things that I've learned over the course of time, so they don't have to go through all the ups and downs of that, then it's something I enjoy doing.
Yeah, I think it's Tony Robbins talks about success leaves clues, and I certainly agree with you. It's you can shorten that learning curve and don't have to necessarily go through the same experiences to get the same results. You can kind of run of the line.
That's right.
Well, what personality characteristics do you think makes a good recruiter? I mean, you've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of recruiters. I'm sure there's a couple, two or three that kind of stick out. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because we actually work with a personality assessment company, and we've been doing behavioral assessments for about the past 8 years as part of what we do, and about 3 years ago, we did a survey on recruiters on this very thing. about what is it that makes an A player recruiter. And we had over 100 recruiters take the assessment. We had their managers evaluate them based on certain criteria, such as performance, such as activity, even how do they fit into the culture, that kind of stuff. And then we were able to develop A, B, C, and D players. And then the PhDs at this assessment company went and looked at all of the different behavioral traits and competencies, and actually came up with 7 key competencies. And I won't go through all 7 of them, but the ones that stick out the most, I think most people would agree with. One is perseverance. It's the ability to push on past adversity. It's, some people call it grit. It's that ability to do that. Another one is just unflappable. That things don't rattle recruiters. High level, high performing recruiters just aren't rattled by things as much, because this is very much an up and down kind of industry. And just go on to some of the recruiting forums on Facebook and LinkedIn and read the ups and downs that people have sometimes in the same day. And to be able to get past that and continue on is very important. And then the last one is connecting with others. It's the ability to connect at a level to where people develop a level of trust with you, to where they keep wanting to come back to you, to where they refer people to you, and you're able to ultimately develop this robust network. Especially when you're talking about search and specialized search, the ones that are really, really successful develop a robust network of connections. And so I think those are the 3 things I look at. There's other ones, but that's what we see over and over again, and it plays out in the assessments that people take. So
that's interesting. So I have asked that question many times, and that is the first time that we've been given, for lack of a word, scientific backing of it. And
yeah,
that was interesting.
Yeah. We had 100 people go through it, and we've had hundreds, if not over 1,000 people go through it since we did that 3 years ago. And it bears out. It's pretty amazing stuff.
Well, now, if somebody were just getting into the industry, let's say somebody's just coming out of college, or they're going through a career change, what piece of advice would you give to a newbie coming into this industry?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There's a lot of advice. I think what we're seeing is that the people that are successful in recruiting, if we're talking about professional recruiting, whether it's search or contract, because of the talent shortage, it's very hard to be a generalist anymore. And so what I would recommend to people is to take a look and say, what's an opportunity where you can specialize in something? And you don't want to be too specialized, because you don't want to get crushed if there's a downturn in that industry, or the economy affects that industry or profession more. So you want to be broad enough, but you want to be narrow enough in a specialization that, one, it creates extra value for you when you're going out and selling. You have a differentiator. I specifically recruit for this. This is why you should work with me. Same thing on the candidate side. It allows you to attract candidates, and you can build that network. It's much easier to build a network within a specific type of profession, or even subset of that profession or industry, than it is to be all things to all people.
And that is outstanding advice. I'm looking at it from our history. We've done this for 30 years. The first 3 years, we struggled because we were generalists. 27 years ago, when we focused on the staffing and recruiting industry, that's where, I think that's true in any profession, but with recruiters, I agree with you quite a bit. Now, the other spectrum of that, outside the newbie, I see them as typically being the most vulnerable. But in my opinion, I think that the seasoned pros are equally as vulnerable, because they do things the way they do them, and they've always done them. And sometimes, life and technologies evolve. What advice would you give to that seasoned pro that's been doing this for 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, things are changing more rapidly, not just in our industry, but in the world, much more rapidly than they ever have. And that continues to just accelerate. So you have to stay very fresh. You have to be open-minded. Frankly, I think, seasoned pros really need to take a look at the way that people communicate now. One of the things I talk to people a lot about is still this philosophy that's very much a phone-based industry. And while it still is, that's not necessarily what a lot of people are doing. We have a recruiting division in my company as well. And many of our communications are taking place via text, via different other types of communication methods. It's extremely hard to get people on the phone, both on the candidate and the client side. And I see sometimes there's this unwillingness to accept that. There's kind of this level of pride in some cases of I need to be on the phone all the time. You need to be on the phone all the time. And sometimes they're looking at their employee who's on their phone texting all the time, and they think they're not working, but actually they're working just as hard. They're just communicating in the way that those candidates and those clients want to communicate. And we just need to understand it. We need to be willing to adapt to it, or we're going to fall behind.
Well, and I think that's wonderful advice. And from one old guy that remembers the business world before the internet, and has seen it progress.
Another old guy.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that things do evolve. One thing though that I always am a firm believer in, and I always hate to sound like the worry wart, but recessions are part of an economic cycle. You're going to have inhale, you're going to have exhale of the economy. And my concern is you have so many recruiters now that have never seen a recession. And I've seen companies thrive. I've seen recruiting companies thrive during recessions. But I've also seen a lot of companies that were, hitting it out of the park, didn't survive it. So what advice would you give to a company right now to prepare, whether it's in 6 months or in 6 years? A recession at some point is going to happen. What advice would you give to them?
Well, a few things. You're right. Eventually it's going to hit. Eventually we'll have a downturn. It's inevitable. Nobody knows when it's going to be now. We're in unprecedented waters here. I would say a couple things. One is that I would evaluate your business and how much would it be, and has it been in the past, impacted by a recession? And is it something that you need to potentially look at doing some diversification of to protect yourself a little bit? I would say for the people that are doing purely search, just direct hire, is there an ability to do some contract staffing? It's a good thing to look at anyways, just from repeatable income and more predictable income, but it also is what is going to be able to help you weather the storm a little bit. The first thing that goes is search, right? Second thing is then contract staffing, and then they cut into their own staff. So at least that gives you a bit of a buffer. So I would take a look at that as well. But the other thing, so when I went through the 2008, 2009 recession, when we all went through that, I had just taken over a region for a large national staffing company. And right in 2008, right as we were going into this. And one of the very first things I said as we were going through the slowdown and everybody was panicking, I said, we can either batten down the hatches like everybody else is doing. We can say, oh, we're in this recession. We can blame everything on the recession. Or we can refuse to take part in the recession. And that became kind of our approach to this, is that we're going to go at this harder. That our competition is laying off salespeople, they're letting go recruiters, they're stopping their sales efforts. They're basically giving in to this concept of recession and this inevitability. Let's go after that. That's vulnerable. So it's not as if recruiting and staffing completely goes away in a recession. Yes, it drops significantly, but it doesn't completely go away. And we're also talking about a pretty significant recession in 2008, 2009. We won't necessarily go through that. So I would say, be aggressive during recessions. Doesn't mean open up new offices and things like that, but just refuse to take part in it. The last thing I would say, which I think will give people hope, if you take a look at 2008 and 2009, the staffing and recruiting industry took a nosedive, as we all know. anybody who was there knows it dropped like 40%. Staffing did, except for IT. IT stayed flat. And the reason why IT stayed flat was because there was a real shortage of IT talent.
Mm-hmm.
And so what it did was it just softened that demand. It dropped the demand on everything else, but it softened the demand in IT. Look at every single skill set that we recruit in now. We are, with the exception of probably clerical, we have way more demand than we have supply. So even a relatively bad recession is we are not going to have that same kind of drop off that we see. I'm not an economist, but if we just look at the trend, if we look at IT as the example of that back in 08, 09, I think what we're going to see is that a turn down in the economy is going to soften things up, and you never wish for a turn down, but it actually might be a little bit to our benefit because it will open up some candidate pools again that right now aren't available. So.
I think I had somebody once tell me, the math doesn't lie. And at this point, the trends in staffing is the demand is so far outweighs the supply that even with with a little bit of a recession, you're still going to have, not a large enough pool because the baby boomers are, because I'm at the backside of the baby boomers, and so I know that the half generation up from me, they're pretty much starting to retire in mass. And so
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, what technology do you see over the next 5 years that, and I hate to use the word disruptor because that's in my opinion overkilled, but just the technology that can help amplify recruiting and staffing, and what do you see that playing a part in the next 5 years?
I think there's three. There is candidate engagement software to really. One of the things that we see all the time working with staffing and recruiting companies is that the focus is so much on getting people through the door, and then once they get into the database, they're kind of thrown into this black hole, and people really struggle to optimize that database, and so they're always focused so much on the people who are active today, actively looking for a job, unemployed, and the shelf life of that is so short, and the competition is so high, and there just aren't as many of those people. So what we really need to look at is how do we optimize the candidate relationship throughout the entire life cycle of that candidate, right? So it's not just when they are looking for a job today, but it is, when they're on an assignment with somebody else, or when they've taken a job with somebody else. How do we keep engaged with them? How do we continue to talk to them until they're ready to come back around? And candidate engagement software does a really good job of that. It's really just like, it's like marketing automation software for candidates.
Okay.
And so I see that continuing to play a bigger role. The second one is this whole mobile workforce management that we're seeing, and it's really, people call it the Uberization of staffing. Right now it really applies more to your kind of on-demand, unskilled or semi-skilled people who, I need somebody to unload a truck this afternoon, and the assignment goes out on your phone. Yes, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to go to it. I need servers tonight. So you're seeing a lot in those types of areas, hospitality and light, very, very unskilled light industrial. But how is that going to have an influence on maybe some of the professional skill sets over time? Because candidates like that. Everybody likes to use their Uber and their Lyft apps, both on the rider and the driver's side. So we're seeing that more and more. I think that's going to be a real disruptor. That's taking off, even though that's newer than candidate engagement software, where it's taking off faster. There's more.
Okay.
There's more around that. And then the last one, which probably it may be the most practical to across, or most applicable across groups of recruiters, is just this artificial intelligence and this automation of sourcing, and really being able to effectively go out and do sourcing of candidates, get those into your database. We're never going to completely replace, nor should we replace, the interaction with humans, because they still need to talk to them, and that's what attracts them to them. But being able to do a lot of the stuff that as recruiters we do on a day-to-day basis that really doesn't need to be done by a skilled recruiter, if that can be automated and we have certain things that are automated, not only automated, but have artificial intelligence and machine learning that gets better and better and better as time goes on. You're really talking about having automated artificial intelligence assistants, recruiting assistants. And that to me is it's already here, and it'll continue to get better over the next 5 years. So those are the three things that I think are going to be most impactful to our industry.
Do you think it's going to be like the automated attendant, where it's going to kind of amplify where you can put other resources, or do you think that that's going to be used against the industry? You know, because everybody, whenever I've always looked at it, and this is a vendor that's watched the recruiting and staffing industry for 30 years. Whenever there's new technology, everybody gets concerned because it's going to replace them. And I typically find that the recruiters do a much better job utilizing that. How do you see that sourcing? In particular, that sourcing, is that going to be something that's going to amplify, or is that something that recruiters need to start differentiating themselves over that?
I think it's going to really enhance what we do. I think it's going to help us. You know, I wrote an article a couple months ago for Staffing Success magazine and joked in there that but it was real. Back when Monster was coming out and was taking over as the job board, we literally in the staffing industry sat around meeting rooms and said, is this the end of us? Is Monster going to be the end of us? And of course it hasn't been. We ended up being the biggest customer to Monster and Career Builder and Indeed and all that. So but you see that over and over and over again. I don't see any of this replacing us in the industry. There may be certain sectors, you know, maybe hospitality gets really, it gets really good at that and automated. But even in that area, I think you still have to have that human element. You see that with a lot of these human cloud organizations where they tried to completely automate it. And many of those have either completely abandoned that, where they've decided just to sell their software instead of do it as a service, or in some cases like Upwork, which is the largest human cloud company right now, they decided to hire some recruiters in so that they had more of a human touch element to it. So I think you're still going to have that. I always equate it, rather than to the travel agency, the travel agent industry, which pretty much got rid of most of the travel agents with automation and with websites. I look at it much more as like the real estate industry, where it has enhanced them. It's allowed them to do their job better. Sure. But you still, at the end of the day, most people will still go and get a realtor because it's complicated, right? You can do a lot of it, but it's very few people try and take it all on their own. I still see that with the staffing and recruiting industry. Well,
outstanding. Now, Tom, if somebody wants to get in touch with you and they say, you know what, I like what I hear here, and I think we need some additional exposure to Tom. How do they work with you? How would somebody get in touch with you?
It's really easy. They can go to our website, talentresources.com. It's spelled like tall and 2 L's and 2 N's, talentresources.com. They can reach out to me via email, tomerb@talentresources.com. And, we do consulting, recruiting, and training for the staffing and recruiting industry. So if anybody has needs like that, that's what we do.
Well, outstanding, Tom. I appreciate you joining me today. And, like I said, I know I'll see you out on the conference schedule and all of that good stuff, but I certainly appreciate you joining me.
All right. Thanks, Wilson. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.